Have a fun-filled day packed with presentations from Bradley and staff, legislative leaders, and even the governor. Tonight we'll let her loose with dinner and drinks at Mancini's. And thank you all for taking time to travel, and some of us that traveled this morning should have traveled last night. So right now I'll turn it over to Bradley and he'll kick us off from here.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Again, my name is Bradley Peterson. I'm the attorney here at Flaherty and Hood, and sort of act as the executive director for the CGMC. I'll make a pitch that I make at every event because it does seem like there's always new faces. If I've not met you before, or if it's maybe been a while since we've met, please come up at some point during the day and introduce yourself and say hi, so that I can know you're here, because I'm very glad that all of you are indeed here. Second thing, I want to welcome, we have a number of our Greater Minnesota Partnership members here as well, kind of our sister economic development organization, and so we really appreciate you being here to take part in the day and to learn about our issues and connect with legislators. So I think it's going to be a good day. It's going to be a very busy day. You're going to get a lot of information. Don't worry, you don't need to retain all of it or use all of it, but there's a lot there. So a little bit of what we're going to do today here, we're going to talk about sort of the legislative landscape and LGA. I'm going to kind of lead that discussion, and then talk a little bit about our priorities around the environment, economic development, and then some of our newer issues related to duty disability and the issues with public safety staff there. And then finally give some lobbying tips, and then kind of the message for legislators. Governor Walz is going to be here, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that when I talk LGA. And then we've got lunch, and then we have a legislative panel with some of the legislative leaders. So we've got, I think, a good program for you this morning. It's going to be a little dense, but you're used to that. And then letting you loose at the Capitol to do some lobbying, and then we'll see you all back at Mancini's for dinner and drinks and conviviality. So I think that's most of what we have here. I'll go back to this slide. The Wi-Fi password is 161. Getting out of the ramp, 703 pound. Bathrooms, I think you've probably all found. So we're going to just hit it and get going here. And so again, I'm going to start this off talking a little bit about the legislative lay of the land and local government aid. So I think the theme of the first 3-4 weeks here has really been the sheer velocity with which the legislature is doing their work, and they're doing big things. You know, it seems like every session when lobbyists are in the hallway talking to each other, every year the conversation is like, oh gosh, I've never seen it like this, or boy, this is really something. This is unlike how it usually is. That's been the discussion like for the last 4 or 5 years. Obviously, COVID was a whole different thing. This really is a different feeling legislature, having 2 DFL majorities and a DFL governor. They are moving quickly. They've already moved either through committees or even in some cases taken floor votes on big issues. The federal conformity bill, which spent about $100 million, that was the first thing that they did. That got done early, the earliest it's been done in a long time. They've been moving bills on abortion. They've been moving bills on paid family leave. 100% clean energy by 2040 is getting its last hearing in the Senate today. Tomorrow it's going to be voted on the House floor, and I would imagine that early next week it'll be voted on the Senate, and it'll be signed by the end of the month. So they are moving incredibly quickly at the legislature, which is, I think, why it is so important that you guys are here now today while we're still on the front end of session to get our perspectives elevated to the legislature and the administration. So of course, forecast shows a historic surplus, almost $18 billion was what was reported in November. We'll get another forecast and update to that here in a couple of weeks, and then that's when the real budgeting process will begin. I don't have a prediction on what the surplus is going to look like. My predictive skills were proven woefully inadequate when I was about $5 billion short last time of what I thought was a really ambitious offer. So I'm not going to make any predictions, but I do think that we're probably going to be in this same neighborhood in terms of the surplus. And if it's a bit more, the governor will probably put out a supplemental budget with some other budget items that he'll want to do. So we are on the precipice here of starting to discuss some of these budget issues after, I think, hopefully things calm down maybe a little bit. They throttle back here on the speed with which they're doing things. So highlights of the governor's budget. This was completed yesterday and put out in terms of what his priorities are. They're putting a lot of money into education and children and families, about $5.2 billion spread over, increased funding for schools, expansion of child care and dependent care tax credit, free breakfast and lunch for all students. There's some mental health things in there. They're really, if you've been watching, putting this focus on making Minnesota the best state for children and families. Paid family and medical leave has a $669 million price tag in terms of how they're looking at that. Public safety aid, which we're going to talk a bit more about here, $300 million. Walls checks, for lack of a better descriptor, although I don't think he's calling them that anymore. $4 billion in direct aid to families. So that's a lot of money going out the door there. And then finally, they are looking at some Social Security tax reduction, about $219 million. It's not the whole exemption on Social Security, but it is moving kind of, I think, up the income scale a little bit and relieving folks of those. So those will all be elements of discussion here. The governor has his plan out. It's going to be time for the legislature to take a look at some of these things. We're going to dive into a couple of his budget items in more depth here and how they impact us and how we're going to be thinking about them. One other thing I do want to mention about the governor's budget in the education of children area. They do a lot for childcare. There's a lot of things in his budget that we like from a childcare perspective. Housing, there's also a lot of housing things that we like from our perspective in terms of the type of grant programs that our cities typically take advantage of. So those are some of the positives in the governor's budget, and I wanted to be sure to mention those. Many of these items are also obviously the priorities for the House and DFL Senate. There you've got Speaker Hortman and Majority Leader Dietzick, the team for this year in the House and the Senate respectively. And so many of these same things are things that legislative Democrats have been talking about. They're going to pass something on paid family leave. They're going to pass something, a big package for education, probably some big things for child care. There might be some differences. I don't know how enthusiastic they are necessarily about the walls checks. I'm not sure. We'll find out how enthusiastic they are about some of the public safety money, just given some of the dynamics in their caucuses in terms of the perspective of some of the more progressive members of the legislature. So many of these, though, items are going to overlap with what the governor's priorities are. So some other dynamics, just in terms of session, that are kind of apparent. The Capitol, the House, and the Senate buildings are finally open, which is tremendous good news. We did start this year with the Capitol and the House, or Senate rather, being open. The House was still trying to do a little gatekeeping in terms of needing a appointment to get into the hallways where the offices were. That quickly got blown up when several floors just left their doors open and you could use internal stairways. So now the doors are completely open, which I think is the best way to go. It makes for a better process. It's going to make for better access for you guys. And I think it's just positive from a good government public standpoint. One of the things that we're finding, and we had talked about this in the fall as being certainly a reality, is that because there are so few rural legislators left in the DFL caucuses who hold the majority, we are finding it is hard to find go-to people to take our issues to. There's only so many of them, and they're obviously doing stuff for their own district or their own other interest areas, and it is a challenge. It is, I think, going to be a challenge for us here going forward, is finding good champions on some of our issues. And so we have been spending more time connecting with metro and suburban members, talking about our issues, making sure that our concerns are elevated. We'll see how that goes. That's, I think, a to be determined dynamic in terms of how it exactly plays out. Anticipate what I'm going to call some shenanigans around water and wastewater funding. And I think Liz will maybe talk a little bit more about this in her presentation. But obviously, as you know, you all rely on programs related to the Public Facilities Authority for water and wastewater funding. There were some proposals last year that would have essentially blown those programs up, and I think they are coming back. So that is something that we are going to have to deal with as well going forward, and I think we'll be here a dynamic towards the end of session, more so than here at the beginning. And then finally talk of a bonding bills. As you recall, last year they failed to pass a bonding bill in what would have been the regular cycle in terms of when they usually do it. And the infrastructure needs, as you know, are just piling up. And so there has been some discussion amongst key legislators of doing an early bonding bill, which is something, if you generally ask me, I would be pretty skeptical of. But there seems to be some serious discussion. There's also discussion of multiple bonding bills potentially, and also discussion of doing capital investment using all cash. We're going to ask Speaker Hortman about that today. So, I think that at least in terms of we'll say it, the vibe out in the ether on a bonding bill, you might hear some tremors of things. We'll see if they actually happen or not. So those are kind of some of the other key dynamics, I think from my perspective, of things to watch for the experience at the legislature so far. Now, local government aid. Obviously, naturally, our highest priority has been for the entire history of the organization. If you've ever come to a CGMC event, you'll be familiar with this chart. Picking up in 2009, where we were at $482 million a year. We had several years after the unallotments that Governor Pawlenty did, where LGA was essentially flat. And then again, as you know, in 2013 and 2014, we picked up with the big reform that we did with an $80 million increase in reshaping of the formula. And then we've been kind of going up incrementally ever since then, most recently with the $38 million that Governor Walz put in his first budget. But we're at a point now where we are looking for more. And so this year there's going to be discussions very similar to last year. First, in terms of updating the formula, and I'll talk about where we're at in that process. And then secondly, increasing the appropriation, which is sort of a given in our world here. So, if you were here last year, you recall that we started this process with the League of Cities, Metro Cities organization, and ourselves, and the Small Cities organization, of basically opening up the hood on the LGA formula and taking a look and seeing, does it still work after 9-10 years for rural Minnesota, for our cities? Are there some things that need to be updated? Typically, the formula is looked at about every 10 years. That's kind of been the schedule that we've been on, usually after the census takes place. There was also interest in the 20 session on the part of tax chairs having us look at formulas, so they definitely encourage us to do this work. And so we've updated the data to use the latest regression analysis and finding the best fit for current city needs. If you do need a description of what a regression analysis is, Jeff Balo is our new analyst. This is his first day. As you know, Anya McDonald moved along to the Metro Cities organization. We're lucky to have Jeff. He just flew in from Tennessee last night. If you get a chance, please do welcome him, but don't ask him much about the LGA formula. Just maybe give until next week. So we got that going. The city groups had been meeting since October of 2022, and we picked that up again this fall here. CGMC, LMC, Metro Cities, Small Cities, as I mentioned. We also have been working with House and Senate nonpartisan staff and staff from the Department of Revenue. So we've got a lot of really good brains in that group, not mine, working on this and taking a look at where we're at. So the action last year, the formula and the increase appropriation of $34 million did pass in the House tax bill, and so that was positive. There was zero discussion of LGA in the Senate last year. Did not have a bill hearing, did not have a hearing on just increasing the appropriation. The Senate did not want to have a discussion about local government aid, period. But once they got to conference committee, there was, as you know, sort of an agreed to, in quotes, conference committee report. And I say agreed to because they had a spreadsheet that probably was 95% complete and some language, but not all the language. And they thought they were working towards an agreement. That was on the last Saturday of session, and then it just evaporated. But in that agreed to conference report was a $30 million increase for local government aid, but no formula changes. And of course, none of that happened. We're still at the status quo that we would have been going into the beginning of last year. So that was kind of last year's action on LGA. So I want to talk a little bit about the potential formula. We spent more time last year talking about it, but I just to kind of refresh folks' memory, we are looking at essentially kind of the same construction. It maintains the basic LGA structure of evaluating a city's versus their needs to meet those needs, i.e. your tax base. It continues to split up cities and apply different factors for each one of these tiers in terms of the small cities, basically up to 2,500, medium cities, size cities, 2,500 to about 10,000, and then 10,000 and above. So there are different factors for different tiers of cities. The same method of tax calculating a city's capacity in terms of tax base, and then the same method of distributing the money within the formula. So the basic architecture of the formula stays the same, but what is new and changing are the need factors. And so here you can see the current need factors and then new need factors. So variations on population in the for the small cities, although a little bit different in terms of what's new. And then the small cities had their revenue need, basically what they could get in LGA per capita capped. And we actually are removing that cap because we think this formula does a little bit better. But the benefit of that is if you're a small city that's close to that cap or even above it, you can now get more LGA as they add more money onto the formula. So that is better for many of our smaller cities. Medium-sized cities, on the left again, the factors, we're keeping the pre-1940s housing and the peak population decline piece, but instead of doing the average household size and that sparsity adjustment that was in there, we're looking at the percentage of commercial industrial property, market value, and then their adjusted net tax capacity per capita. And again, these were run through an analysis and found to be more predictive in terms of city spending and city needs. I think one of the things that is I think a little bit challenging about these need factors as we think about them, and I know I've had conversations with many of you, is you sort of look at the needs factors and you say, I don't really get how that relates to my city. Right? I mean, you stand on Main Street and you sort of look at your city and you say, okay, but I'm not really sure how this fits. True, and it's always going to be complicated and frankly a little vague, because some of the things that you would think would make sense in terms of adding into a formula that makes sense to you as you look at your city, and we've analyzed to death this idea of nonprofit property in cities and the percentage there. And in terms of being predictive and in terms of being positive for our cities, it doesn't do that great of a job. And so I guess what I would encourage you to think about more is the outcome in terms of what this means for your city from a dollar perspective and what it will mean on an ongoing forward basis. Because I think that sometimes, try as we might, try to simplify things as we do, these factors are not always going to be the most intuitive. And that is the nature of the beast. Steve Peterson, who was our analyst when I first started here, many of you will know him. He is easily one of the smartest people that I have ever met. And his comment on the LGA formula as well, you can have simple or you could have fair, but you can't have both. And so that, I think, has kind of been at least how I think about these things as we go forward. The large cities, again, we retain the pre-1940s housing. We are adding the peak population decline piece to that. Again, the market value percentage, and then population age 65 and above we found was a fairly good predictive factor in terms of cities' needs, and then the adjusted net tax capacity per capita again. So those are some of the factors that go into it. Like I said, we spent a lot of time, the smart analysts have spent a lot of time on these, and we evaluated probably 40 to 50 different factors as we did this work, including just evaluating the current formula. So the advantages of the new formula. First off, it decreases the number of cities that are seeing reductions in their LGA, including several CGMC cities. And what I think is the real advantage to this formula is because we are recalculating the city's needs based on updated data and stronger need factors. In most cases, it increases the amount of LGA that a city will receive over time as the appropriation increases. The way that I think about it is, you'll hear us sometimes, and I hate it when we use it because it is a term of jargon, but we'll sometimes talk about your unmet need. That's the amount of need that the formula says you have between your tax, what you can put in through your tax capacity, and the amount of LGA you're going, and then there's a gap between that and what the city or what the formula says you need, right? And so what this does is many cities across the state, including many CGMC cities, because the formula is kind of old, are bumping up against that gap. And so what this does is it lengthens that runway for you so that as we add more money into the LGA appropriation, more cities will continue to benefit, and it'll be a more accurate predictor of city need, at least in the near future here. So that, I think, is the real advantage to this formula. So the 2023 game plan, this is a little bit unique as well. There's been a lot of discussion about how to do this amongst the local government folks. And what we have found is that there is a strong interest on the part of the legislature to have the cities and the counties work together. This has not historically been our approach, but I think that has been kind of the will of the legislature, and the cities have sort of acquiesced to this approach. So what you're going to see is one bill that does a couple of things. It's going to increase the local government aid and county program aid appropriations by $150 million each. We were encouraged by members of the legislature to go big, and that is decided where we have landed. So you're going to see a bill that has a $150 million increase. You're going to see a bill for both LGA and CPA. You're going to see our formula, new formula in the bill. And then the third major thing that you are going to see is a factor that would increase the appropriation for both LGA and county program aid by inflation every year. We did this in the late 90s, and it worked pretty well. What you saw was kind of levies and aid kind of marching in the same sort of direction within a certain narrow band of each other. Early 2000s, LGA kind of flattened out and levies went up. And so that inflation factor, and in terms of adding to the appropriation, should keep those in closer step with each other, and alleviates the need every year for us to come hat in hand and say, we need an increase because of this or that or inflation, or we're still behind. This will get us marching along, hopefully, in a pretty good direction. So we'll do those three things. That bill is in the process of being, they call jacketed. It's going through the drafting process, and we should have a bill very, very soon that is going to be carried by Representative Liz Lagarde in the House. He's been a great champion for local government aid. He's currently the chair of the House Property Tax Division. Iron Ranger, just all in on LGA. And Senator Klein, who was the bill author last year. He's actually a suburban legislator, but he was the DFL lead on the Senate's Property Tax Committee last year, and he's going to carry it again as well this year. I have great confidence in both of these authors. I think they're great. I think it'll be just fine. So that's the game plan in terms of the basics here. Challenges, as we've talked about, there's lots of competing needs and wants for the surplus. There may be, and we haven't really exactly nailed down who or from where, but we've been again hearing rumbles of competing local government aid formulas from other entities. And I don't have enough information yet to confidently tell you exactly where that's coming from, though I have a good hunch, and if you buy me a brandy Manhattan tonight, I might tell you. And then the governor's budget, just in general, presents a challenge for us. especially his proposal for this public safety aid, the $300 million that we talked about. That is going to be a thing that we're going to have to contend with. The governor's proposal, and this is where things are going to harken back to days of old a little bit here for some of you who have been around a long time. The governor proposed a $30 million increase in LGA and county program aid. This is, to our mind, a remarkably low number given the size of the surplus and given where we're at with just the LGA appropriation in general. It is certainly lower than our expectations. It is not even an inflationary increase. So we have that to contend with. The governor in his 2021 budget had nothing for LGA, and nor did he have anything in his supplementary budget last year. So he did do the $30 million in his first budget, but we've had a gap here, and now he's doing $30 million again. So the starting point, from our perspective, makes getting more out of the legislature much more difficult. Again, we're asking for $150 million. I know that's a big ask, but $30 million is not enough. It's a 5.5% increase. Given where we're at, given how large the surplus is, to my mind, LGA it's not sexy, but it is the basic blocking and tackling of government in terms of you all being able to provide services and infrastructure to your businesses and residents. And so, yesterday, we put out a press release, which is in your packet, on LGA, in which we expressed our surprise and disappointment that the governor's budget was not where we thought it should be in terms of LGA. Now, the governor's going to be here at 11:40, and he's going to be mad. He is going to be mad that we criticized his LGA number. I already know that because I got an earful from one of his staff members yesterday. And so this is part of the process. Nobody likes conflict. Nobody likes friction, especially when it's with somebody who you sort of consider an ally and a friend. And that's, I think, what makes it even more difficult compared to other times when we've argued with governors, which we have done. And so I think my perspective of this is there is no way through but through. We continue to make our case for what we need based on the facts and information that we have, which I think is strong, based on your understanding of your own community, and we'll see where it goes. But you should be prepared. I just want everybody, there's no illusions here. I want people to be prepared for the governor to come in kind of hot. That's what it's going to be. And if you have questions or concerns about that, please let me know. But that's going to be the reality of it. Mayor Fabian, you look like you're pregnant with thought.
Well, first I was going to say, could you just go back one slide? Taking some notes.
Yep.
Okay.
Is that where you wanted to
You're
be?
going to talk about the public safety.
Yes, yeah, that's still coming up. Yep,
Thank you. Yeah. Well,
anytime.
I can say all kinds of things, but I just...
I know. So that is where we stand with LGA. So now, and this gets into, I think, part of what the governor's mindset is going to be. In his budget, he is proposing $300 million for this public safety aid. It's about 51, so it's split between all 87 counties. I almost forgot Hennepin and Ramsey. All 87 counties and about 330 cities. Not every city is going to get any of this money. It goes to cities that have police departments. This is my understanding of how it is going to work. So it's split, as I said, per capita. It is one-time money, and the idea is that it can go to support, public safety activities, hiring bonuses, retention, equipment, you name it. I think all good things. But again, from our perspective, LGA is much more flexible. It's ongoing. You're not going to think of this money and use it to build anything permanent into your budgets. And again, it doesn't go to all cities, where LGA has much broader coverage in terms of the number of cities that it hits. But to his mind, this is almost a substitute for LGA. Don't worry about what I'm not doing on LGA. Priority has always been local government aid. And so I think you are going to see this as something of a proposed offset. It's not the way that I see it. I don't know exactly how many of you see it, but I can imagine that a lot of you would like to see a higher LGA number, regardless of what is done over here, because that is ongoing, permanent property tax restraint that supports the services in your communities. And so that's what we're challenged with. I think the governor would also point to other things that he's doing within his budget that is positive for property taxes, but those all have to do with schools. And then also maybe some of the other things that he's doing for Greater Minnesota in terms of the child care and housing, which again are great things, but again are just one of the things that we need, LGA being the other.
So Bradley, is it your understanding that public safety money goes to just police departments? Many small cities rely on their county sheriffs for law enforcement protection, so it's not going to go to the county. Is that correct? So
for cities, yeah, the counties are going to get a share as well. They're going to get, I think, what was it that Commissioner Marquardt told me, $53 per capita. So every county is going to get some money, with the idea of, and what they're doing is they're subtracting out the city populations of the counties, and that's how they're getting their per capita distribution. So it is going to both, but you're right in that the cities without police departments are not getting any money, at least so far as I understand the current proposal. So, we've talked about the challenges in terms of our work here. I want to take a little bit about making the case for local government aid. So over time here, we've seen this rapid increase in inflation. This 55% doesn't even necessarily touch what's happened in the last 6 or 8 months. Meanwhile, LGA since 2009 has grown 17%. And so we are definitely behind by any sort of measure of inflation that you're looking for in terms of keeping up with the needs. Again, expenses in every category are going up. We've got a handout that has all of this in your packet. And I think when you talk to legislators, you can talk from your own experience, right? Because you are doing this work every time you do a budget. What are my costs now in terms of salary employees? What are my costs now in terms of healthcare? How much more are we allocating to put gas into the squad car? How much is a new squad car? All of those things, you guys are living in real time here, and you can tell those stories from your perspective. My belief is that if LGA were only increased at $30 million, the governor and the legislature would be unhappy in the resulting property tax increases that you would have to do in order to make up the difference. And so it is pretty important, I think, that we make this case. LGA share as a share of the state's general fund, again, has been decreasing over time. I think of this as an erosion of the state's commitment to the state and local government partnership. About a decade ago, it was over 3%. Held back in the 90s, it was at 4%. Or late 90s, early 2000s. We're now down hovering to just above 2%, and with this next budget, it's going to be even less. So by no measure is LGA keeping up either with inflation or with just the general growth in the state budget. It's not increasing proportionally, not even close. So can we get an increase? Yes, but we're going to have to make our case, and we're going to have to deal with some bumpiness, and we're going to have to deal with some unhappiness from the governor and perhaps others. And so the way that I am approaching this is there's no way through but through. And you keep the eyes on the prize, and you focus on that, and you move and march forward, continuing to make your case that these are dollars that need to be infused into our communities to support them so that we can continue to grow, continue to thrive, continue to live towards our potential as communities. So that is, I think, all I've got on this particular topic. I would entertain a few questions if there are some. Otherwise, I would be happy to turn it over to Liz. And yes, Jason.
Bradley, it feels like we're missing the last piece of the argument, which is this is why it benefits the state of Minnesota. Like the fairness argument makes a ton of sense. The, hey, we need more money, everybody else has more money. But if I'm, Zach Stevenson in Coon Rapids or Julia Coleman and, Chan has to, like, why do I care about LGA?
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point, Jason. And so, I mean, my answer to that would be the idea that, these communities, you are engines of activity in your regions, small or large. And you're on the larger end of that spectrum, but I, had a discussion with Mayor Fabian here from Roseau, who was, talking about all the good things from a manufacturing perspective that's going on in his community. LGA supports those activities. If you are going to have manufacturing activity in Minnesota, if you are going to be, as Mankato is, a center for the agriculture industry, if you are going to be the seat of a higher education institution that benefits all Minnesotans, then you need to have a strong community to host those things and to be the fuel for that activity. So that would be, I think, the answer from my perspective, just a very shorthand. But I think each one of you in your own communities can zero in on, okay, what is that thing that we host? What is that thing that we do that benefits the state? I mean, in your case, it's the ag processing and all the good work that's done down there on that activity. Bemidji, you host college and university, lots of state agencies that are, you're the regional headquarters for a lot of state agencies in the northern part of the state. Moorhead, you're fighting a war of competition with your neighbors across the river in terms of keeping and attracting talent, building tax base, supporting your colleges and universities. So I think each community has a story to tell, and I would definitely kind of drill into those. Thanks, that's a good question, Jason. Yeah.
Riley, I'm going to ask you to read the governor's mind. So I'm just curious, how much flexibility do you think he has on that $30 million? I'm wondering if he's essentially coming in low because he knows the public safety proposal is not going to be greeted very warmly. Do you see those numbers coming together, or are we kind of really pushing uphill on this?
Well,
Bradley, can you repeat the questions as they come in for our
yeah, so the question was inviting me to read the governor's mind. And to what extent is there flexibility on that 30 million, given maybe some of the other dynamics with public safety aid and its reception in the legislature? I think there is room to move. And luckily, he's not the only entity that we have to contend with. I think that what we will see, though, is that it will develop over time. He might be pretty mad right now, and that might cloud some thinking. But I do think that time does tend to lend perspective, and I hope that we can get there. I don't know that that's a real insightful look into his brain. There's probably a football analogy in there somewhere that would get thrown out, but otherwise, I think that's where we're at.
Can we get him a Brandy Manhattan at lunch?
I don't know that the governor drinks, actually. You could probably get him a Diet Mountain Dew. I know he consumes lots of those in the course of a day.
Is that Brandy Manhattan?
No, this is just apple juice. No, I'm not pulling like a Dean Martin here, anything like that. So, well, I think we'll have time for more questions and thoughts. We have a question way at the back, and then I'm going to turn it over to Liz. Yes.
Bradley, on the new formula, you're looking at houses older than 1940. After World War II, the 50s, there was, or late 40s, there was a lot of growth in the communities. I guess what's the emphasis for the 40s rather than houses 1950s forward?
So we looked at and did the analysis on what would it look like if you did 1950s, 1960s, 1970s even, because you would think that with the passage of time that it would perhaps be more predictive or yield a different result for our cities. And interestingly, and again, this was what the statistics bore out, it really doesn't. And that's where, again, I think makes the point of my, these factors, while we would like them to be intuitive, are not don't necessarily play out that way when you apply the analysis? That's a good question. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Liz, who's going to talk a little bit about the environment, I guess. From where? Oh, from over there, because she took a nasty spill on the Senate, at the Senate, on the floor there, because they're so shiny and new, and was helpfully reminded by a lawyer legislator that the state is immune from claims like that, so you're on your own.
Thank you, Bradley, although he did ruin my story. I was going to tell you about wrestling with a bear, so. Hi, I think many of you know me. If you don't, please do introduce yourself at some point today. My name is Elizabeth, and you can also call me Liz. I do the environmental and energy lobbying for the CGMC, as well as annexation and land use. And some of you may also know me. I do Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails lobbying, as well as work for an municipal energy agency. So let's talk about water. So all of you've got it, all of you deal with drinking water, wastewater, and so it really is a top priority for us. I'm sitting here staring right here at the former Representative Fabian. We have spent a lot of time working on this topic together. This year, we actually, and we did this last year, some of you may remember, we want more money for water. And one of the things we have found is that when you're dealing with different parties of the legislature, different legislators respond to different messengers. And so we have actually been working over the last 15, 18 months with the coalition. I don't know why it's doing that. If somebody like Kelly can figure that out, it would be great. But we've been working together with and not only ourselves, but also LIUNA and the 49ers, which are two unions, as well as Conservation Minnesota, and which I call the most sane of the environmental groups, and not on here, but the St. Paul Regional Water Group. And we all bring something different to the table. For example, at a hearing last week, I had my colleague Marty Seifert testify, because he's able to reach out to certain legislators that perhaps the others would not. But it's been a really good partnership. So what we are trying to do is address, these needs. As you know, back in 2020, there was historic levels of funding for water infrastructure, but it was great, but kind of like LGA, not quite enough. The needs are really still out there, and we are very, very excited about the federal funds that are coming in, but as we have to keep reminding legislators, those don't begin to cover what we need. It's one of those things with the federal funds that are coming in. Everybody's like, oh, that should take care of it. You don't need bonding. And we're like, yeah, we do. Because basically with the federal funds, what it does is sort of expand the pots of money we're already getting there. It does add some money in there for lead lines, but overall it's just sort of an expansion of what we would have been getting anyways. Aging infrastructure. I'm guessing a lot of you have old wastewater facilities, old water facilities that need updated. We've also got regulatory requirements we're dealing with. Increasing weather is wreaking havoc here and there. We've got lead lines that pose health hazards, and as we all know, they forgot to pass a bonding bill last year. So just let's talk about needs. Why do we need this money? Because there's a lot of need out there. Every 2 years, the MPCA conducts what's called the Water Infrastructure Needs Survey. You've probably, at least your city staff has filled this out every 2 years. And what it does is it tries to project the need for the statewide sort of funds over the next 20 years. You can kind of see what the last survey said. It was $5.3 billion, and that's a 22% increase over the last survey. And I'm going to be honest, it is always an underestimate, because part of the problem is that you have no idea what's going to be in your permit in 3 years. You might be getting a new phosphorus limit or chloride or mercury or something like that. You might have something fail. And as we all know, we've been getting inflation. These are all pre-inflationary numbers. It's a big number and it's going up. Drinking water, again, something we don't want to forget. This is something we've been diving into a little bit more over recent years. Again, big need in Greater Minnesota. This is the survey by the EPA. I'll be honest, their numbers don't update as quickly as we do with in-state numbers, but the needs for drinking water are even higher, at least projected to be higher than wastewater. So what are we going to do about it? We are going to be introducing a really big bill. I apologize. I had really hoped we'd have it introduced by now, but the jackets keep getting waylaid. It's been an interesting session for that. I've had that happen with a couple different issues, but we have a bill. It'll be introduced soon. And hoping we're going to have Democrats and Republicans on it. We do have Grant Housechild is going to introduce it in the Senate, Jeff Brand over in the House. And it looks a lot like what we were doing last year. We are asking for $150 million for the Point Source Implementation Grant Program. That is the program that provides you money if you're being asked to install new facilities, whether it's the wastewater or the drinking water, to meet, basically regulatory limits. The state gives you a grant of up to $7 million, which is good, but I'm gonna be honest, inflation, one of the things that we're also asking for is that cap ideally be eliminated, but if not eliminated, it needs to be raised, because these are expensive projects. If you don't believe me, talk to Mankato, Albert Lee or Austin. Owatonna too can tell you all about it. In addition, we are gonna put $100 towards the $100 million towards water infrastructure funds. Those are, that's a grant program aimed, it's not aimed primarily at smaller cities, but those are the ones that tend to benefit. But it also, again, helps cities sort of meet their needs on drinking water and wastewater, and then matching funds for the federal dollars that are coming in. We also believe, again, that PSEG program is really important, and what we'd like to see is ongoing funding for it, as well as some programmatic changes. I mentioned raising the cap on PSEG. We'd also like to raise the cap on the WIF grants. But as Bradley mentioned, I'm going to be spending a lot of time on this, but I also fear, because we faced this last year, and I'm hearing rumblings it's going to happen again. There are legislators, particularly in the House, who think that the metro area, particularly, say, Minneapolis, deserves more money for their programs, and have tried monkeying around with the WIF formula and other things. Again, this is why it's really good to have that partnership that we have, because all five of us, the 49ers, LAUNA, Conservation Minnesota, we will be working to make sure that they are not ending what even the EPA describes as one of the most successful water funding programs in the country. It's really important. And we do not need them to be messing with it. How do we make the case? Well, again, many of you know this because you've seen your costs go up over the last year. If money is not available, the projects, the costs go up. Another really important thing to remember, and this gets back to the people who are trying to mess with the formula. The challenge that Greater Minnesota has, we have we do have a lot of people, but they're spread out across the state, 80 counties versus 7 counties. And in the 7-county area, they've got the Metropolitan Council who handles their wastewater needs. They have a much bigger race base. Even if you were to give the entire WIF pool to Minneapolis, it would not make a dent in the rates of their people. Let me tell you, if we handed out that way, all of that money to any one of you, you'd probably have gold-plated wastewater, but we spread money across the state, so that doesn't happen. We are also just facing aging sewer and wastewater infrastructure needs. A lot of your wastewater facilities date back 30, 40 years. Same with the drinking water. Pipes can go back 20, 50, 100 years even. They need replacement. And, improving the regulatory environment. One of the pushbacks I get from some corners is like, well, why don't you just deal with the regulations? Trust me. Former Representative Fagan knows this. We have worked on addressing the regulatory things, but that's not the only issue, and the needs are still there. Let's talk a little bit about lead lines. Hopefully by now most of you are aware, but if you're not, the EPA is requiring all cities to be doing what it's called an inventory. If you don't know about it, your water folks probably do, because the MDH has sent out notices about this, but all cities have to conduct an inventory and potentially plan on they have to identify where lead lines are, and identify a plan on how they're going to deal with it. And the federal government is putting money into this, but when you start looking at the actual costs, and actual needs of both the inventory and the replacement, it's big. And so this has become a big priority as well because, again, we don't want our cities to be sort of flat-footed on this. And so there's federal money coming in, and some of that will be used for inventory, but what we're proposing is an additional $10 million for grants to help, all cities map, meet that deadline. If the entire $10 million is not given out, it will roll into the other money we're requesting, which is $80 million per year for 10 years for city grants to help remove both the public and private portions of the line. And I'm going to be honest, that's really important because if you just remove the city side and it stays on the private side, it really doesn't do any good. The lead poses a serious health hazard, particularly to children. So there's a really good health reason to get rid of these, but we can't, our people, our citizens and our cities need help, and that's why it has become a priority. It has been advancing. Like mentioned, we had a hearing on this last week, and we're going to continue to push on this with our group. I think we are making progress, but who knows, things can happen, things can get sideways, but it's really important to put this money in there and make sure it applies throughout the entire state, which is kind of what our role is. Other water funding requests. We will be supporting, just a big bonding bill in general. We know a number of you have requests because, quite frankly, again, the PFA grants are great, but if you're a mid-sized city, they're just not enough. I haven't even had a chance to dive into the governor's budget bill, but I do know that there's a lot of money for what they're calling climate resiliency and planning and implementation. And this is something, call it whatever you want to, but what we are seeing is that extreme weather events are really wreaking havoc across the state, causing flooding, causing, wastewater and sewer overflows and things like that. And so we are going to be supportive. I need to actually read what's being proposed by the governor to make sure that we're supportive of his specific package, but that is an area that we are going to be supportive of. And I know some of you may be shocked for me to say this, but we are also going to be supporting an MPCA request to put more money into their budget. And you're like, why are you doing that? Well, the reason we are doing that is that we got two choices here. It either comes out of your pocket or it comes out of the state budget. And we'd rather have it come out of the state budget, because if it doesn't come out of the state budget, the MPCA is going to resume their rulemaking on fees in June. So trust me when I say we are really supportive of $1 million more to the MPCA's budget. So just nod and agree with me on that. We need to get it done. And now we're going to switch from water. Does anybody have any questions on water? I mean, I literally could talk about wastewater and drinking water all day, but that would probably be boring. Does anyone have any questions on wastewater?
Just one quick question. I'm sure that everybody's followed in the news what happened to, I believe it was Lanesboro, and we got this attorney.
Oh.
Is there a CGMC strategy to combat potential harm to all kinds of cities?
Yeah, Mayor Fabian has raised a really important point. So if you haven't heard about it, it's happened to Lanesboro, it's happened to Hinckley, quite frankly, the city of Fargo in North Dakota has even reached out to us about it. We kind of mentioned, we're like, hey guys, we're in Minnesota. But, what's happening is that if you remember a couple years ago, there was a law firm that was going around suing businesses both in the metro area and in greater Minnesota. I think some down in Marshall got hit. Other places got hit, basically saying, even though I've never really visited your restaurant, you violate the ADA guidelines, and so you need to pay me money. So they made all their money off of that, and then they've decided to move on to wastewater. And so what they're doing is there is publicly available information, sort of if your wastewater, inadvertently goes over some limits. And what they're doing is they're taking that data and basically filing notices to sue. And it's kind of, they're using these sort of as a threat. Like, if you do not pay us, and I think they're asking for $50,000 a pop, if you don't pay us $50,000, we're going to follow through on this lawsuit. Obviously, it's very concerning. It is something we are in the process of trying to figure out what to do with it. Our folks who are more on the legal side are looking at it, and I'm going to be talking to them again later this week. The MPCA is aware and really urging, if this happens to your city, do make sure you are getting a hold of the MPCA. My understanding is if they have an open file on it, it sort of holds the lawsuit, in abeyance, but we are trying to come up with a strategy on this. The challenge is because it's a federal law, it's really difficult to deal with it at a state level, but at the same time, we are trying to figure out, we've talked, been talking to the MPCA, talking to others, because we do think it's really important. But I guess, the one thing I would make sure of is if you get this notice, talk to your attorney, and I probably also need to talk to the MPCA because they might be able to help you address that because they're seeing enough of these lawsuits. If we can figure out a way to deal with it legislatively, we will be all over it. We just haven't figured something out again because it's federal law. So, but thank you for bringing it up. It's a really important point. If you get one of those notices, do not ignore it. Any other questions? Yeah, Ron.
Stormwater, what about stormwater?
We love stormwater. We think it should be dealt with. That is, I should have mentioned it. That's really kind of what that climate resiliency gets into. Like I said, the governor's budget came out last night. Bradley is not kidding when he says how fast and furious it's going. It is going crazy, and sort of keeping up with everything is a little crazy. So the governor's budget is my weekend reading project, but we are supportive of more money for stormwater as well. Again, with that extreme weather, it is really hitting our cities and something we need to deal with. Any other questions? Okay, I'm just gonna, you're probably like, what does opioids have to do with the environment? Well, not a ton, but as some of you may know, the CGMC has been sort of very actively engaged over the last year and a half or more with the Attorney General's office as they've been suing opioid companies, manufacturers, distributors, others, even some pharmacies, to try and recover some funds to address the opioid crisis. And last year they had entered into a bunch of settlements, and we had been working with all cities over 10,000 to sign off on an agreement. Well, they have reached additional settlements, so there is more money coming into the state. We'll be receiving more funds to battle the epidemic. One of the things that we spent a lot of time last year doing, myself, Lisa Bodie from Moorhead, the Deputy Public Safety Commissioner from Mankato, all three of us spent a lot of time on conference calls and Zooms and all this stuff. I think Mayor Holmer was in on a few of them too, sort of talking about how this money should get divided up. And the way it was divided up, was basically, and we did polar cities, we talked to a lot of folks. Most cities recognized that they don't have public health departments, and that was, probably where the money was best used. So the way that the structure of the fund distribution in Minnesota has been is that cities 30,000 or over get a direct distribution, and then the rest of the money flows to counties. Counties are supposed to be working with their cities on these. I'm not sure how all of that has been going. Plus, there's some that goes to the state, making grants available to cities. And so that's been the way it has been, and at least for the foreseeable future, that's how it will be continued to be distributed. Well, the thing is that the way they have structured these settlements is that the state gets more money if more cities 10,000 and over agree to waive their claims, agree basically they're not going to go and sue individually. And the reason there is that, no company wants to settle a lawsuit and then all of a sudden say Rozo decides now we're going to sue. So it's basically, their way of sort of guaranteeing against, future suits on these specific incidents. And so, we worked last year to try and ensure that all of our cities over 10,000, sign up on this. So if you are a city over 10,000, you will have, I think you may have gotten it yesterday, you probably got an email that said, hey, blah, 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 opioids, direct payment, blah, blah, blah. I'm gonna be honest, I read the email before it went out and I said to the AG's office, this thing is the most confusing thing I've ever seen. Cities are not gonna understand what they may or may not be getting and what they're supposed to do. Can you change it? And they're like, yeah, no, we can't change it because it came from the Nationals. So if you got that email and you're wondering what it means, it basically means in about another week, you're gonna be receiving documents. The formula has not changed. If you are under 30,000, you won't be getting a direct payment. It's going out under that same distribution. But you still, again, we're going to be begging and pleading you. It would be really great if you sign off on the settlement so the amount of money going to the state increases. I apologize that email was so confusing. It is what it is. If you have questions about it, contact me or you know, in our office, and I can direct you to people who can help you. But if you're over 10,000, please plan on signing off on that again. Again, we want to maximize the funds going to the state. I think that's it. You know, I wanted to talk to you all about annexation and land use. They wouldn't let me, so if you have questions, you gotta find me later. But again, great to talk to you. I feel like I should tell a few jokes, but I think I'm gonna get the yank because Eric's coming up. So, thanks everybody.
All right, on to something just equally as exciting with economic development. My name is Eric Simonson. For those of you that don't know, I think I've met many of you over the course of the last couple of years. And I think before he gets back, I'm just going to take a minute here and express what I hope is our collective thanks to Bradley. Well, there he is. Pretend you don't hear this. Yeah. He's going to take a lot of heat on this local government aid thing with the governor's office. And I just want to say this, from somebody that's kind of sat in a legislative seat before, and Mayor Fabian, you'll hopefully agree with me here. Over the course of the last number of years, it seems like the governor has interjected that office earlier in the process than a legislative decision that comes up with a collective idea, passes it, and sends it to the governor's office. So if somebody tries to tell you that the governor has the power and the ability to kind of draw a line in the sand on day 3, that is not the case. And I appreciate him sticking up for this issue because it's important to all of you and all of your cities, and the way that he gets his strength is by the collective voice in this room. So I'm going to move on to what I'm supposed to talk about, but I just wanted to make sure that you express your thanks to Bradley because he's going to take a bit of pressure on this one. But I'm there to back you up until you fall down. So we've got a number of priorities that we're working on for the coalition with respect to economic development. As you can imagine, and has been the case for a number of years, childcare and housing will take the lion's share of that effort. We're happy and pleased to participate and partner with the Greater Minnesota Partnership and some of those organizations that belong to that group in advancing some of these priorities. So I just want to kind of talk to you a little bit about some of the things that we're advocating for this session at the Capitol. And again, you're going to hear a common trend here that we don't have bill numbers yet. It's going to be the case for many of our items that are kind of log jammed at the revisor's office. Greater Minnesota Child Care Facilities Program, we're seeking $20 million in GO bonding for that program. Again, we've heard rumors, rumblings of a bonding bill perhaps coming out as early as the first part of February. We'll see. It's kind of at the legislature's prerogative to do that or not, but we are seeking $20 million for this program to kind of get this facilities program up and off the ground. D, Child Care Economic Development Program, another $10 million. It's primarily focusing on programming. And $6 million for the 6 Minnesota Initiative Foundations to kind of expand child care provider and community support programs. We believe that the Initiative Foundations is really where a lot of this type of work should be happening. They've got a track record of being successful at accomplishing good goals there. So we're seeking $36 million there with the hope that we can get that money out to these initiative foundations where they can turn it around really quickly and do some good work. Housing priorities. Public infrastructure related to housing development. Many of you that have been around here for a while will know what BDPI is, Business Development Public Infrastructure Program, that's been used for years and years and years, very successful, specific to Greater Minnesota. This is kind of the housing arm of that, if you will. Public infrastructure specifically for housing development, $10 million in grants is what we're seeking. And this number, we just changed this yesterday, I think. The $40 million for Greater Minnesota Workforce Housing Development Fund, we changed that. That was 20 is what we were initially seeking. We went to 40 because that's what the governor put in his budget yesterday or the day before. So we might as well start at least at the same level that he's starting at. And in this case, I don't have a problem with that. This one happens to work to our advantage. But all of these things are designed to really help cities across Greater Minnesota really dig in deep on this economic development piece, and housing and childcare is such a critical component to that. Beyond housing and childcare, there are other things that we will continue to work on. that are equally as important. Again, with the mindset that the more tools that we can put out there that are available for all of you and your staff to utilize, the better chance that you will have at getting some of these developments moving in your individual communities. I mentioned earlier the BDPI, the Business Development Infrastructure Program. Again, long-lasting program, long track record of success. It's been pretty popular with legislators to do this. So we're seeking another 20 million in GEO bonds for the BDPI program, and then we'll have another bill for 2.5 million for each year of the biennium from the general fund. This is two different bills here, kind of going towards the same place. It's important for this general fund piece to kind of fill in the gaps on years when, when the legislature decides not to pass a bonding bill, for example. It's good to have this to fall back on, so at least we can continue to get some money out the door. And DEED recognizes that these are successful and important programs. We're taking a crack at some tax increment financing policy. We'll see how this goes. This is one of these is kind of a recurring discussion that hasn't been widely accepted yet by the legislature, and one of them is a little bit different. We want to extend the 5-year rule to 10, specifically for areas outside the 7-county metro area. We understand that there are cases where that clock might start ticking, and you may need a little bit extra time just based on the unique circumstances of what's going on. Frankly, this probably would be just as successful in the metro area, but that's not who we generally advocate for. So 5 to 10, this has been around for a while, this idea, so we'll give it another push and see what happens. The second point is kind of new and kind of interesting. Tax increment financing, everybody has a different opinion about TIF, right? And whether it should be used, whether it shouldn't be used, whether it's good or whether it's not. We just want to put it out there as an option for you to utilize. And this would give you the opportunity to use TIF for market rate housing developments. Right now, current law allows you to use TIF for affordable housing, no problem, but it does not allow you to use that tool or that mechanism for market rate housing developments. And many of our communities across greater Minnesota are looking specifically at needs for market rate housing, and this would be another opportunity to help advance that cause along. And of course, we will continue to stand behind restoring the historic structure tax credit, which sunsetted in 2022 due to inaction by the legislature. That's our economic development pitch in a nutshell. Those are all on the handouts. These are all really important. Again, we don't necessarily have bill numbers, but you can kind of talk about the concept and the funding mechanism behind these. And as you go forward, I think some of these we'll get across the finish line. I'm pretty confident about. Some of these might take a little bit of conversation over the course of a session or two, but I feel pretty good about the reception that we're getting as of now.
Do you have any authors?
We do have authors. For example, BDPI will be authored by Senator John Jasinski in the Senate. He has authored these bills before. Even though he's in the minority party, he's a great champion for this program, and he'll do fine. And more than likely will be authored by Representative Wolgamott in the House. The tax increment financing will be authored in the House by Representative Liz Lagarde, also our tax division chair, so that'll be helpful. And we're still working on a Senate author there, and we'll work with other groups on the historic structure tax credit. So, Bradley, we're going to talk about duty disability.
Yeah, we'll do this together, right?
Yes. How
I'll
do we
let
do
you
that?
start.
All right, we're going to talk about public employee duty disability. Long-standing issue in terms of the availability of duty disability pensions. Over the course of the last few years, public employees have been accessing this disability pension at a much higher rate than ever before. Perhaps you could tie it back to year 2020, when we saw a significant rise in applications and approvals of duty disability pensions. Now, I will say that in our conversations putting this together, both with the board and with kind of the staff and Bradley and I and others, we all agree that if people are deserving of a duty disability pension, by all means, you should get that, right? We're coming at this from two angles. and that's kind of what we want to talk about is number one, the cost for cities to provide the ongoing health care for that employee and their families. The law says if you're a public employee and you go out under a duty disability pension, your last known employer has to provide your health care to you and your family until you're 65 years old. That can get pretty expensive pretty quickly, as some of you in this room can attest to. That is a lot of money. That is a lot of liability for the cities to assume. And if you look at the chart on the right-hand side, this goes back to 2010, and it basically shows you that in 2010, the legislature had a fund set aside for cities to request reimbursement for those costs. And in that fund, they put $1.36 million. And that's been ongoing appropriation for many years, at least since 2010. Seems like a lot of money. If you go back and research how that came to be, why is it $1.36 million? It's simply because that was the number that was left over on somebody's spreadsheet. And they said, let's put it in this fund and pay for this. So you can see the green bars indicate that in 2010, already you were seeing requests from cities that exceeded the amount available. So that money has been kept flat all of these years, and you see the green bars continue to rise. Fiscal year 2022, we're at over $10 million in requests from cities to the state for reimbursement just for these medical costs. It's a huge deal, it's a huge liability. Granted, many of them are in Hennepin and Ramsey County, but even in certain pockets of greater Minnesota, we're starting to see 2, 3, multiple folks out on these disability pensions, and it's starting to have an impact on their budget. So we want to fix this problem. It's burdensome to local units of government, obviously, that's you, but our solution is to fully fund this program. So we will have a bill, no numbers yet, but we will have a bill that does that. That basically creates an automatic appropriation into this fund so that every year enough money goes in there to fund all of the reimbursement requests that come in from cities. Is that me? I don't know. Senator Howe will likely be our chief Senate author. I can probably say safely today that he is our chief Senate author. I don't know that there's anyone better positioned in the legislature to talk about this issue specifically than Senator Howe from the St. Cloud Way Park area. Great guy. He'll be a good advocate for all of us. So we want to update the state law to just kind of provide this automatic appropriation. That's about half of the problem that we're trying to solve. So Bradley, did I miss anything on that?
No, I think that's right. Then we'll get to your run. One other point that I want to make is Eric mentioned that these are mostly, there's certainly the perception that it's Minneapolis and St. Paul that's driving the cost. That's about 55% of the claims. The other 44% are from outside the metro. And so these claims are coming from greater Minnesota, and I think that's even one of the first hurdles that we may have to overcome is making people understand that this is not just a metro problem. And as you see, the reimbursement that the state is offering is not keeping up. Ron, did you have a quick question?
Well, I have a question. What percentage of these requests are for actual physical injury or for mental injury as far as mental health?
Right now, about 80% of the claims are for mental health issues.
Right, yeah, that's true, and I think that's a good point, because historically, if you go back in time, we never saw that number of mental health claims relative to duty disability applications. So that number has certainly increased and is probably directly reflected in the amount of costs that our cities are seeing. So, like I said, there's two components of what we're trying to accomplish here. There's the whole funding of the health insurance piece. That's kind of straightforward and a relatively simple project. When we get into policy changes with the application and the duty disability pension process itself, it gets a lot deeper, there's a lot more stakeholders involved, and there's a lot of concerns about what really should become good public policy. So we've tried to come at this from the aspect of kind of a two-pronged approach. One, we want to give cities more transparency into the process. If you have an employee that makes application for a duty disability, That employee should not disappear into the who knows where, and you never hear from them again. You never see any paperwork. You're not part of the process. You don't have the opportunity to weigh in. That's what's happening now. So we think that's wrong, and that there should be more ability for cities to be a part of that process. PARA is not mandated to require regular reports from qualified medical professionals as to status. So the law says that once you receive and are approved for a duty disability pension, now you may be 25, you may be 30, you may be 40, who knows how old you are, but once you're approved, there's no mandate in law for that individual receiving that pension to report back to PARA and say, hey, just so you know, I'm still under this doctor's care, I'm still considered to be disabled, I am still rightfully receiving my pension. All the statute says is that the executive director may do that, and in most cases we now know that that's not happening. So we think that it's only fair that if somebody's going to be out receiving a pension and these benefits, that they at the very least should see a qualified medical professional once a year and have that report come back to PERA as well as the last known employer. We think that's a transparency issue. We think it's a fairness issue. It doesn't take away anyone's benefit that doesn't deserve it, but we want to make sure that we're staying on top of this. Current law says cities are not allowed to appeal decisions by PARA. You're not allowed. You can go through a contested case hearing at the end of the thing once it's approved and kind of talk about the impact of the health insurance obligation, but you're not permitted by law to appeal your case to PERA, and we think that's wrong. The person requesting the disability pension has all of those rights, right? If they end up getting denied by the executive director of the pension plan, they have the ability to come forward to the PARA board and make an appeal, but the city does not. The city doesn't have that voice. There's no opportunity for the city to weigh in and say, hey, we think we should submit this employee to our own independent evaluation. None of that happens now. So we think that that's where we can make some improvements. So we want to provide transparency for these employers throughout the entire process. We want to provide an appeal option for cities to the PARA board, and we want to move this forward this session. There is a lot of talk around PTSD, mental health, how it applies to this duty disability pension process. We're not really going into the weeds on that. We're kind of digging in on the process overall and allowing cities an opportunity to be a participant in that process, if that makes sense. Does that make sense, Bradley?
Yep.
Questions? Yeah.
So, it'd be great if the reimbursement fund is fully funded, but even if it's not fully funded, what is the way that you actually, how is the decision being made? Is there a rubric? Is it just the cities that start with county at first bid?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting approach. We should maybe try that one. But essentially, they take the money available and divide it by the number of applicants, and that's how the money goes out. So in many cases, it's a pittance in comparison to what their request was. In some cases, it may be relatively close, but we know that, like the graph shows, I mean, we're approaching $11 million in fiscal 22, and the way health insurance costs continue to rise, that's only going to continue to go up.
Question way over that.
Yeah, Bradley, Mayor, this is relating to the TIF and child care. I've met with different communities in Greater Minnesota, particularly like Boston, that actually have been created to increase their sales tax to create a child care facility. The challenge is these rural areas have great child care facilities or access to capital funding, but there's no labor, and there's a lack of, or there's just labor. Like if we were to create some sort of a liability pool to help these people that are wanting to start child care facilities, that'd be awesome. The other thing with the TIF for small cities, it's great that you're looking at market rate housing and all these other things. In the cities, I can do TIF because I'm going in a 300, 500 unit apartment building. Up in our rural town, we're doing a 10 unit apartment building, and in some cases, single-family homes, and the cost of the regulations to go with the bond council to even establish a TIF is too prohibitive for us to even approach them. We need some relaxed regulations so we can actually go forward with these TIFs without causing it to be a burden on the city or the developer.
So a couple of comments there. First off was on the just workforce availability in terms of folks for childcare. And the idea of, and I think an innovative idea of doing some sort of liability pool for employees. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that's something that should be considered. The other issue had to do with using TIF for housing and need of some regulatory relief. So I think we're going to end with questions there and actually move on to our guest, the governor, who is coming up.